The following story is an artistic work of fiction and falsehood. Only a fool would consider it as fact. Chapter 22, Maison Encore. Lots of random discussion and Silent Hill fanboyism. Part 1, April 28th, 2007. Hey B, I'm bored and sick. I swear, hospitals will kill you, even if you go in healthy. No story this morning, but, sup, to those of you I'm not generally up to talk with. Oh, and before you ask, if any of you care, she's fine. I guess the preventative IV cocktail and general luck plus the immune system of the youth protected her, where my lack of a tube in the hand, usual shitty luck plus oldness didn't. I'm fairly sure of this, since I've called at least 6 times over the last day or so to make sure, earning me the exasperation of my coworkers. Oh, and as a general piece of advice from a healthcare professional, don't try eating pasta for lunch when you're feeling a bit queasy. Just stay on the safe side of things. Shit, forgot my trip bag hat. Old habits die hard. Just going to post random pictures now, since moving too much is bad and stuff. Holy shit, posting in a Nurse-kun thread? Indeed you are. Here, have this? Excellent. I've never been in a Nurse-kun thread before, sir. So she's doing okay? Posting between horrible botchings of EBA stations. Yes, she's fine. Not even a case of the sniffles. Hopefully, I'll have recovered by tonight's shift start, but if not, I'll try and trade with someone for Sunday. I try not to get too full of myself, but when I've missed a few days before, she's gotten more troubling than usual. Morning, Nurse-kun. Just got in from my night shift too. Anonymous also works in a residential home. Curse you, Bowie, and your confusing oil baron stage 2. Oh yeah? Well, another night shift's work done, my brother. Enjoy your day, what you have of it. I'd normally be there for another few hours yet, but my puking all over various things / people convinced them to send me home midway through last night's, and into tonight's too. I want to join your cause too, Emo-kun. Hey, fuck you. Them's fighting words, bitch. This is the reason Nursey is taking care of that kid. Pick of legless, clothless lolly. Her missing legs? Well, yeah, that is at least 30% of why she's in my care facility, under my supervision. This may be an old wives' tale, but I found that if I take a decent dose of zinc and vitamin C, I'm able to overcome most minor sicknesses. Zinc's hard to come by in food sometimes, but supplements are cheap. Well, hard to take stuff when what goes down comes back up. But yeah, my supplements shelf space is not inconsiderable, though not ridiculous either. I want a Nurse-kun to love me. I may be male. Try your local classifieds. I'm sure there are plenty of lonely nurses out there looking to love, too. What do you mean troubling? Also, how's the adoption thing going? Well, her PTSD symptoms tend to get a bit worse. Becomes more of a handful. And as shitty as it makes me, being here, a noticeable rise in anxiety in general, and nightmares in particular, have happened the 2 other occasions I've had back-to-back, or longer absences from work, for one reason or another. And it's going. Not much has changed since Wednesday. Sup, Nurse-kun? Please keep being a hero. Well, so long as it's not a hero. Well, hopes you get better soon and don't infect your girl. Best probably to wait things out rather than risk getting her sick. Normally, I'd be in bed now too, as I've got another shift tonight, but ours is only a small home with just 2 kids and 2 night staff, so it's not unusual to get a few hours nap, which makes the next day not so horribly shitty. Well, yes, coming into work when you've got a likely communicable illness, a common trend in the general workforce in America, despite its contribution to greater inefficiency, is generally a no-no in a home filled with elderly patients with weak immune systems, as I'm sure you understand. Besides, I get a few enough days off as is, so I won't fight it too hard. Though, as previously stated, I won't take more than I need, since she seems to prefer me there. You specialize in a small group home for kids? Nice gig. All of those were filled up when I was looking, and I hadn't worked with kids before, so I didn't pursue it too hard at the time. Anyway, grab what you can, man. Nice to hear from you. So nurse, I don't know what to ask even. I mean, I have only read your threads and archives. How is she? How is your status? Etc. It's just so fucking basic questions to ask from a B-star. Sorry.
She's about the same as she was last time. Doing pretty well, all things considered. I believe I'm still moving forward, even if I might be getting worn down a bit. Guess I'll just have to take it, since I don't see other alternatives aside from letting down a lot of people I care about.
Sup, Nurse-kun? I'm usually up for both because I don't sleep. For the record, the last time made at least one anon cry. Gotta help you if I find out this isn't real.
Well, as real as anything can be. Am I a nurse that dreams I'm a cage-fighting president, or am I a cage-fighting president that dreams I am a nurse?
Wow, a Nurse-kun thread. Haven't participated in one since nearly the beginning. Enduring awesome, etc. Anyway, reading your threads has somewhat of a positive impact on an aspect of my life I'd pretty much given up on. To prevent TLDR, we'll just say it's related. Young girl in a bad position, family, hard life abuse, etc. And someone with feelings that aren't sexual wanting to do something about it. So I can sympathize with part of what you're going through. I wish you the best of luck in continuing down this rough path.
Yeah? Well, good for you, brother. Good things tend to be hard too, which is unfortunate. But then, I guess if they were easy, the world wouldn't be in the state it is. I'll try not to let down my burdens if you try and bear yours. Deal?
No problem, although my gig is more of a learning disabilities thing. We're a private home not run by the NHS. Britfag here. We cater to more specialized needs. For example, the 2 kids we have right now are a very low-functioning autistic 13-year-old who's strong as hell, and a 15-year-old with a severe behavioral disorder. Both are a huge handful, and pretty much the reason we have them is because no one else can cope with them. Like I said, we're a specialist home. Night shifts, however, are usually peaceful, thank God.
I can imagine, since, well, my girl isn't far off in terms of being driven to behavioral problems, though without the autism, thankfully. Hopefully that doesn't sound insensitive. She'd probably be in a similar home if it weren't for her physical disabilities as well, the combination of the two forming the poison pill, as it were. Well, good on you, anyway. Thumbs up.
ITT, we give health advice to a health professional.
I did say it almost went without saying. Being in a field doesn't mean you're the wisest sage of it, and before blasphemy, etc.
Screen cap of Shiro, people die when they are killed, Emiya, from Fate's Day Night. Nurse-kun.
That's an impressively apt picture at speed. Not too ill to have command of a massive B folder, eh? Well, I may not have her memory, but I have enough to remember the general layout of my main picture folder. Some of my more amusing pictures are located in. I'm not completely retarded after all.
Nurse-kun is introduced to the hashtag fortune system.
Thanks? What the hell?
Nurse-kun, his other major was in Chinese philosophy.
I am a man of many layers, much like delicious cake.
Sup, Nurse-kun? Read the story on Wiki-chan, and I found myself designing leg prosthetics in my head the other day. Nothing that's going to make me rich, though.
Well, I'm sure the industry could always use another mind, you know. Even one not at work on it full time. Who knows? It could at least make for an amusing sci-fi cybernetics design or something, at least. Sure thing, but I'll be honest, from my perspective, as hard as our kids over here are to deal with sometimes, what you're doing and what you've already done has probably been 100 times harder than anything I've had to put up with so far. So I'm wishing you the best of luck, and I hope everything works out good for you and her. Try not to discount your own achievements. An older colleague of mine gave me that advice when I was just starting out, and said that those of us in the professional care provider industry that burn out often forget about it. You're welcome in any of the threads, anytime.
To be honest, I thought I'd never get to see a Nurse-kun thread in the flesh. It seems it is worth being up around 11 a.m. GMT +1, after all.
One never knows when a borderline, idiotic man-child will be around to amuse you with his fumbled attempts at wit. No. Lucky you.
So, Nurse-kun, has she finally recovered from the ERCP? Has she been walking around more?
It's not a procedure with much of a recovery attached to it, assuming there aren't any complications, like bleeding or a bunch of other things I'm not going to try to remember now. Thankfully, there weren't any, so she just needs to sleep off the sedative, and continue not to eat anything for a while longer afterward. She was fine when I saw her Thursday night, before I had to go home, and I don't really know. She hasn't had the occasion to do so, and her rehab nurses are still advising against it, so maybe I'll offer her a stroll or two up and down the corridors when I get back.
If I could draw. Always liked Cyberpunk, just wish it had a better name. On that note, anyone know if the guy looking at doing a live-action Battle Angel Alita movie is any good?
I don't really follow movies and news much, but I heard Cameron wanted to do it, last time I heard anything about it. He directed The Abyss, Aliens, Terminator 2. I'd say he's got fairly good potential for win.
Nurse-kun, are you wanting to stay in nursing for the rest of your life, or are you wanting to move on to bigger things?
What would you define as bigger things, buddy?
Sup, Nurse-kun? Tonight I went for a picnic by myself to see the flooded river before it finally goes down. There's nothing quite like eating tasty food, like egg salad sandwiches and Jamaican lemonade, while sitting on the space where the sidewalk disappears into the river. Then I got home to the dorm and there was a fire alarm, so I'm still awake. Nothing actually to add to this thread other than you rock. I'm a cyberpunk writer, so stories about people with missing pieces fascinate me.
Maybe you should team up. And writing the next great cyberpunk novel together. He can design the shiny bits, you can provide the washed-out dystopian urban blight of the setting. Might I suggest a hard-bitten but still human due to the influence of a stranger that extended a hand to a young blonde half-Japanese woman with a few cybernetic limbs and a laser eye as the protagonist. The Japanese are still cool in cyberpunk, despite the fall of their economic zeitgeist, right?
I don't know, like a doctor, paramedic, specialist, or something. What's the pay like for nursing anyway? I've been thinking of getting into the health field, pharmacy specifically. After reading Damaged Goods, though, it kind of makes me want to go into nursing. What do you think about pharmacy?
Well, nursing is certainly a calling, rather than something you get into to make a ton of money and retire to a big house somewhere warm. Since the changeover from apprenticeship to degrees, nursing isn't as robust a profession as it used to be, particularly since once you've been in school for 4 years or so, you tend to find yourself asking, do I really want to do this? When you start doing the real thing. And it isn't a glamorous job, even if they let you wear the white uniform and hat. Pharmacy is much more stable and less traumatic, a good solid career choice, if the work you'd been doing is the sort of thing you don't mind or enjoy doing. I have an aunt by marriage that's a pharmacist. She seems to enjoy it. I'd certainly do some research before I went to nursing in earnest, though, particularly if just inspired by my drivel. It's not much different than joining up to carry an M16 because that movie was so cool, since the reality is a bit harsher. Still, we can certainly always use more brothers and sisters for the cause, so think it over some more. And no, I haven't particularly thought about going into another career, though I don't think I'll be working in a home for the rest of it. This was intended to be a sort of purgatory, as I thought about some issues of my own.
I was about to go to bed when I saw this thread. I guess I will stay up a bit longer and say get well soon.
Well, no need to trouble yourself on my account, but thanks for the well wishes.
Image flood. Nurse-kun engages in an image posting war with Anonymous for a few bit. What are Nurse-kun's favorite games? I'm wondering this because of the recent upsurge in DS-related posts due to the recent US release of Pokemon Diamond/Pearl.
I don't get to play as often as I'd like, but I enjoy EBA, duh. Owendon's fun, despite my not understanding any of it, or being a J-pop fan. I played Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow a bit, but having been a Metroid fan myself, though the 3D versions never caught on with me, haven't been able to find a copy of Phoenix Wright, so playing Part 2 seemed wrong somehow. Godhand is impetuous. I spent way too much time on the Disguise. I enjoy both the Silent Hill and Resident Evil series, and am kind of bummed that Capcom shut down the Outbreak servers, since I didn't really get to play online much. My ISP hookups having been not very workable until just recently, when I got busy. Can't think of much else off the top of my head, though I'm sure there are others, like...
Nurse-kun, I just want to say you are someone I really respect. Reading your threads makes me smile and makes me look at my life, which I'm currently failing with. But that's okay, as long as someone is happy with what you're doing, then you're doing your job, right? Lol.
Well, it's never too late to change. And life is one of those things where so long as you win in the end, you win, and it makes just about all that fails moot. Not Mooksican moot, but, you know what I mean. Cheer up, anonymous kid.
We love you, Nurse-kun.
Huh. Shucks.
Finally, a positive for working all night and coming home in the morning. A Nurse-kun thread. Yay. Sup, Nurse-kun?
Haven't puked in a couple hours. Finally beat a stage on EBA with an S rank for the first time all day. Nurse. Gold medal hero or zero. Which we played in the waiting room at the hospital on Wednesday as well. You?
This is the first live Nurse-kun thread I've seen, so I thought I'd just stop by and thank you for what you've done. You're a great inspiration, and reading your post on the wiki always makes me feel better when I'm down.
Well, I'm happy to help. Thanks for all your support. Now I need to play the movie stage.
Playing EBA a decent portion of my night as well, but I fucking fail at it. I've never gotten an S.
Play more serious.
Hey Nurse-kun, I was wondering, how did you get into your line of work?
Well, I come from a very healthy family. None of us have had any serious illnesses, until my dad just recently, that is. And we've all been pretty lucky. No major accidents, lives cut short by illness. So I was always kind of curious about something I didn't know much about, much like people raised in families that are poor and hard laboring, sometimes seeking to escape to academia or science and such, maybe. I mean, it wasn't the driving factor, but I guess it played a role in things. I'm no saint, as usual disclaimers apply, but I'm no sociopath either, so I've always, cared somewhat about other people, so I'd considered a role in medicine for a while. Now, the particular aspect, that wasn't something I was sure about. Medicine is a very teamwork-based field, perhaps the most of any I can think of, except maybe the army. You can't go off on your own and expect to do well. Nurses need to work with doctors, need to work with lab workers, need to work with pharmacists, need to work with radiologists, need to work with clerical workers, need to work with paramedics. Or the patient dies due to a crossed wire or a miscommunication or ignorance of this and that. I considered trying out as an EMT, but not much of an adrenaline jockey, and, sad to say, the vast majority of serious calls EMTs respond to wind up being lost, simply because it's too late by that point, even if ER doesn't make it seem that way. That seemed a bit too much of a downer for me, though I thought about it a bit more complexly than that, so I looked elsewhere. I wasn't sure I wanted to be a doctor, for a number of reasons, which I admit included not really wanting to add another 4 years of schooling before I got out and started doing things. Besides, I figured that if I ever changed my mind, I could always go back to school later, when I'd mellowed out a bit more with age. So, nursing. Male nurses are a punchline, and I knew it going in. It's one of the main reasons, I think, that so few guys go into the field, really. And something that needs to change, though good luck doing it with, the more you know or something. Still, when I looked at what being a nurse really meant, what they really did and were needed to do, and I don't mean fetch coffee or doctors, despite what some of them might think, it seemed like something I'd be good at. So I went for it. It's a good career for branching off into another one later anyway. Firemen, EMTs, doctors, and nurses are needed anywhere you go, much like cooks, even if we don't seem to get paid to reflect that need. So here I am. I am a nurse. Hear me shout, code blue, and announce vitals.
Wow, my world feels more dangerous. Nurse-kun, ever play any RPGs, like D&D or any of the White Wolf games?
Sorry, was a bit heavy-handed there, perhaps. I mean, they won't always die, but things will go badly to varying degrees if they chain of trust and teamwork breaks down. Whether that means a rash or, well, worse. It's not completely dire. Guess I was still a bit subconsciously ticked at the bigger things comment from earlier. Though I guess I should be used to it now, since most nurses hear it so often. The "wow, so you settled for doing this, huh?" implication, if it isn't said outright. I like what I do, at least some of the time, though it is, as I've said before, often a thankless job. It is a necessary one, absolutely as much as doctors, despite their claims to the contrary. And yeah, I've played a few back in high school and college, and a couple of times since with some friends, but not regularly, particularly of late. Busy these days, you know?
Nurse-kun threads every night now? Maybe I should just wait for the novel or the movie.
Nah, this is a special broadcast due to unusual circumstances. There won't be a flood of Nurse-kun to inundate the market and sicken the viewing audience just yet.
Nurse-kun, what do you fap to?
You know, stuff. I find Yomi erotic, as the picture above you may indicate, if it helps. I could make a comment about not fapping to my girl, but that'd just be tasteless, really, if true. Actually, I don't have that much actual porn on my computer, photographic or drawing. Yay for image boards?
Yeah, them diseases will get you in them hospitals. Just don't wear surgical masks. Lollies can smell like Michael Jackson. But then again, they might be safe since she's the Shota type.
Har. But wearing a surgical mask is part of my job. Sometimes.
Good to hear. We wouldn't want the sage and email field as cruise control for beatardedness crowd to tire themselves out. I just happened to catch up today with the stuff in the wiki, and your posts are the best thing on the internet. Maybe that's just because I'm a dad.
Well, I don't know if I think of myself as approaching dadhood just yet. It's kind of daunting, actually. Part of what left me hesitating, even if I'd be old to be starred as one even 50, hell, 30 years ago. But I'm starting to consider. Fuka is also erotic.
Oh well, I'm off to lurk more. Also, cocks.
Cocks indeed, my good sir. Pip pip and cheerio.
When Ebola is in town. But seriously, I've been following this saga for a while now. You go above and beyond the Call of Duty, good sir. Salud. And you know, don't get her sick. I mean, IV cocktails and immune systems aren't good, but these things find ways. Oh yes, find.
Well, that is the crux of my worries and my rewards, yes. Sometimes, however, one must go above and beyond in order to truly fulfill one's duties, required duty aside. And yes, that's the last thing I'd like. I won't be going back in until it's past, literally and figuratively, hopefully by tomorrow's shift. Oh yes, erotic. You know, I'm starting to suspect the empty stomach and nausea are making me a bit hyper. What do you guys think?
I'd respond properly, but no. Yomi's the best thing to end my night. At 5:17 a.m. Fucking insomnia. Oh yes, fucking.
Fucking. Continuing my random thoughts, I'm kinda sad that I missed that captain thread in the other day. I saw it once when I was checking the post count in B's main page, but was still typing out one of the 2 main installments, so I kind of went back to that without thinking, but missed it altogether. Saw a few pics were posted today in a thread in I, but, I don't get as much time in B as I used to, with all the stuff happening, and while B isn't more important than reality. Oh well. I really like the captain's work, by the way. I'll say it here, though I've said it to him in I too. Never fails to make me laugh, including his interpretations of me and my situation. Horrible me.
Responding to bondage pic of Tomo from Azumanga Daioh.
I don't know, man. She seems like the type to be way too wired and twitchy in bed, and I'd never been sure if she'd somehow be seized by the urge to donkey punch me when I least expect it.
You lost me.
Don't mind me, that was just rambling. Lack of sleep, general crappy feelingness from multiple sustained puking, dehydration, despite putting in my own IV with a saline drip. I've got skills, oh yes, but only picked up the 2 bags on the way home, and hunger combined to make Nurse-kun something.
Well, what? Did something happen to you?
Caught a stomach bug, presumably in the hospital while I was with her for her ERCP. One of the patients in the waiting room at the GI unit looked rather green around the gills, though I wheeled her and myself as far away from him as I could when he came in and dropped into a chair near us. Manifested itself roughly 44 hours later, halfway through my shift the next night. Thankfully, she didn't catch it either from him or, later, from me, likely due to the extra antibiotics and infection fighters she was given as a safety measure for the procedure. Luckily, I'm still grateful for. Shit sucks, man.
Hey, can anyone tell me how to save a thread like they do in the Rapid Shares on the wiki? I don't think anyone from it is archiving this, and since they even seem to care about stupid little threads like the one on Christmas, I guess some people might want to see this too. Rampantly stupidity and waste of bandwidth that it is.
See 4chan archive #request interface for details.
Oh, more EBA etchy/prawns please, Nurse-kun, and anyone else who has them.
Not much out there that I'm afraid of, unless you're interested in the agents and male cheerleaders from Wendon having sex with each other. Seems to be a fair amount of that. Oh, Japan.
First time I've caught a Nurse-kun thread. Awesome. You rock, man.
Well, I try. Though only on the DS, I'm afraid. Though, who knows? Maybe I can get her to teach me to play the guitar one day.
Anyone?
At all? Searching Firefox extensions, my adult brain isn't finding much of use. And my buddy that rapid shared the last one, and wrote those action-packed imposter posts, being the far more talented than I writer he is currently asleep.
Maybe need to lurk more, but save pages perhaps? Me trying to them all. I'm really not a terribly sophisticated web user, all things considered. Nurse, not a computer scientist, etc. That and the low IQ, you know. But must have missed the last thread, since if you don't mind me asking, what procedure is going through and for what? Might as well break with the non's usual blackness and laud you for the big man you are. Makes me proud sometimes while surfing the shithole of the internet.
She got tentacle throat tenderly, but I held her hand through it, and she was a brave little lolly for it. Thankfully, the sedation for this scampi is the most intense of them, so she was asleep for the whole thing, though it was kind of weird and disconcerting seeing that multiple-foot-long black tube disappearing past her lips, and teeth guard behind them. And, well, thanks. Like I generally say, I'm not that special. I'm just doing what seems like the right thing, which I still believe most of B is capable of as well, should push come to shove, even if we might not want to admit it to ourselves. She's a strong, beautiful, courageous girl. If I couldn't match even a tenth of those qualities in her myself, what sort of man could I consider myself? Ooh, it worked. I learned something new. Level up. Now I am head nurse. Spin slowly and gracefully as scrubs fade into sparkles and new transformations into classical cap white old school style white nurse's uniform and dress form, with white cap, thigh-high white stockings, and heels included.
Shit, now we're out of our jobs. Seraphan. Are you a Silent Hill fan, Nurse-kun?
Yes, indeedy. 1 is my favorite, with 3, and then 2, then 4 in the distant last place. Didn't even get past the second time out of the apartment. I thought it sucked the shit so. Yeah, I love the other 3. Wish I could find a copy of 1. Haven't been able to in forever. And I haven't done much online shopping, but I suppose I could, but... Hearing that sobbing in the washroom at the elementary school in the first one almost made me tear up when I first heard it, fair to say. Great series. Hope 5 returns to that greatness, as it may seem to be, even if it's modeled more on 2 style. To complete a thought I had just as I was hitting submit, my girl really reminds me of Heather, or the other way around. Now, she's been thrust into this nightmare of a world, even if it may seem normal to the rest of us, everything she knew taken from her, if not by evil cultists, then by nihilistic chance, leaving her angry, ready to lash out, and unwilling to trust anyone anymore. They're even both dirty blondes, hair color, not talking about the general level of grime look they gave Heather, though I'm sure she's quite clean in the game. Though it's natural on my girl and from a bottle on Heather. I like to think she'll learn a sexy beam one day, though I don't like to think about being the target, and learn to use an iron pipe too.
1 is my favorite too, and yeah, 4 sucks, but I did like the last area a lot.
I suppose I should go back and give it a chance, as I've played through worse, but it just pissed me off so much at the time that I returned to the rental place within hours of renting it, despite having it for days. Fucking ghosts. Silent Hill isn't all about ghosts, it's about tangible nightmares, things that you can beat to death, even if they weren't actually ever born from a mother's womb, and bleh. We'll see. The main character's absolute lack of a personality didn't help much either.
As for finding Silent Hill 1 for a decent price, good luck. It's been going for a lot lately. A friend of mine got it for my birthday last year, so I guess I'm really lucky.
If any game needs a Resident Evil 1 on GameCube remake, it's Silent Hill. I can't be the only one to think so, and I just hope I could be half the dad Harry was, though I hope she doesn't turn out to be a conduit for the birth of a new god too, considering she suffered at least as badly as Alyssa did. And young girls are the most common source of poltergeist activity, you know. And before not being as sexy as Lisa. Also, and before being sexier than Lisa, you sick freaks.
That's it. I'm definitely drawing Amputee-chan using a sexy beam. It has to be done.
Well, I'm not quite sure what to think, but I have to admit that it's got a corner of my brain, and it's tugging at it.
The last area makes it worth it. It's the only part of the game that I actually liked. Christ, having to go through each area twice was awful. I don't know. I'm kind of torn on that. I'd love to see a remake, but at the same time, I love it the way it is. And really, don't worry, you're a great guy from what I can tell.
I wouldn't want them to change any of the plot or particular scare situations, as I think they were perfectly done. The cat in the locker? Christ. Just a graphical overhaul, hire back the original voice actors even, as I think they did a pretty good darn job considering the general state of voice acting at the time. Dahlia did an amazing job of putting the crazy in crazy pants. Maybe a slight control polish or two from 3, but then Harry was unique for his time, in that he didn't really know how to fight, so they shouldn't make him too easy to kill things with, or no easier than the first one anyway. But smoother graphics, better shadow/lighting effects for the flashlight, better fog effects, oh yes, please. To dream, as it's pretty unlikely to ever happen, as I've been dreaming about it for years now already. Oh well. Geez, this picture looks like my girl, or an older version of her. Hadn't seen this since before December, it being in my old picture files from my previous computer.
And I can't imagine she'll have even more suffering thrown at her after all of this. Even if that happens, if anything happens, she'll be a wise girl. We learn from pain after all.
Yeah, but sometimes we learn too much. Like a Lovecraft protagonist, and man, did Silent Hill 2 ever have a messed up female cast, but in a good way. She's a lot cuter than Laura, even in her generally withdrawn moods. Are we getting auto-saged or something? Last post didn't go through, but I suppose it could just be me or my SQL. It was just saying the movie seemed dumb and I hadn't seen it yet, so no great loss. Oh well.
By the way, I go on I as C221. I'll definitely be doing that picture. Maybe tomorrow if I have the time.
Yeah? Well, that would be awesome. I really do value the fan art people make, not just for the pictures, which are great, but for the sentiment behind them, the investing of time, effort, and the feelings that lead them to conceptualize the art in the first place. And they're all in my HD, even that Twisted Metal Ampu-tan one from I yesterday. I admire you guys, since I don't have any creative talents of my own, particularly when it comes to drawing, something I haven't done since I was 8 or so, and
I like the movie. I think the only thing that bugged the shit out of me was the whole cult.
That's what bothered me too. I think they focused too much on that. It's also a lot different from the cult that we know, but I guess it could be a different sect of the Order?
That was what a fair amount of my missing post was centered on, as sounding particularly dumb. I mean, a big point in the atmosphere and plot of the game was that everybody in town had disappeared, tourist and citizen alike, except for a strange, almost suspicious few, and a trio of out-of-towners. Why had people gone, and where to? Were they these monsters, transformed from their human shapes by a girl driven to rage by pain and misery? The nurses and doctors with the parasites being the most obvious examples, but the petrodactyls and ape things as well. Perhaps, and the children things? Were they all in the otherworld, the corpses decorating that place? Had they merely been swallowed up by the fog? Instead, we got some sort of extreme Wiccans and witch burnings and man what? Not much of a selling point to me. Dahlia and sort of a Kaufman were cult enough for me on their own. More than enough. In response to shitty GIF video, thanks for contributing that. It really fits in with this Silent Hill discussion. While dark and shadowy as that initial frame is, could easily be a shambling monster. Not merely the shambling ass you yourself are, figuratively at least.
That's good. Well, finding out that you're a Silent Hill fan pretty much made my day. And personally, I find that I do my best when I draw for other people. Just for the record, I obviously didn't do any of the fan art I've posted. I've only drawn 2 things for Silent Hill. One that I never finished, and the other I never got scanned in because my teacher is holding onto it. I need to get that watercolor of Heather back, goddammit.
There's the picture I hadn't posted yet. Oh well. It's a great one. It was my wallpaper for a while. I love one the most as a game, but Heather is my favorite character. Just edging out poor devoted but continually befuddled Harry. Best female character I've seen in a game yet, in my opinion. Samus doesn't count since she's sort of jumping and shooting Cypher for the vast majority of all the games I've played, awesome as she is. We often do our best when doing it for someone else. Perhaps it's human nature, something to encourage us to work together as a society, since no man is an island. I mean, I'm a terrible writer, but people seem to like these, as I'm writing them for all of you, and for her in a way, in my conflicted back and forth between her privacy and dignity, and wanting other people to know about her, to care about her the way I do, which I feel she deserves, to have more than one lone buffoon know about this great little girl, aside from the ones that knew her before and have since abandoned her. Way. Yes, he is.
Heather is awesome. Definitely has a lot of character, especially in comparison to James and Henry. Harry is still my favorite, though. He's a cool cat.
And to double respond, Heather really does sort of resemble an older version of my girl, though she has more Japanesey characteristics as well, of course. The hair color is nearly spot on, the green eyes, the look of determined in her eyes when she needs it, and the willingness to get up close and personal when someone/thing needs his/her/its butt kicked. Of course, I'm hoping she doesn't graduate to pipes and knives anytime soon.
Holy shit, Nurse-kun, what, where?
Nurse-kun, how do you feel about someone taking the basic details of Yu's story and using them as the basis for a novel? Obviously, you are hard to contact to talk to about this.
Well, that depends. I've kind of discussed this before, but it got a bit bogged down that time, though I'm not terribly clear-headed this time either. As a commercial novel, sold to a publisher for print and release for sale, I'd rather they didn't. Firstly, it'd be too wide and public a method of dissemination, which, for both our lives, isn't something we need right now, but rather the opposite of what we need. Second, while I'm happy to be doing this for free for those of you that care about her, and that is why I'm doing it, my being bored and sick tonight and doing a dumb content-free thread to amuse myself notwithstanding, I know I'm not a professional writer, but maybe I'd like to try it someday, and to write about this myself, after it's done and things have been explained and accepted and settled where they need to be. Raising her, should I be so lucky, will be an expensive endeavor, and while the remainder of her life insurance policy, my savings, the stipend from the government for caring for a disabled adopted child, and the help my family should do for a while, it won't last forever, and I'll need a source of income somewhere. My hopes aren't pinned on all this. I can find work nursing again, once she's recovered enough to be able to attend school again. Fingers crossed. But it's certainly an option that I like to retain, you know. Thirdly, money aside, if it is destined to be read by people outside of here in printed form, I think I'd like to be the one to write it, somehow, since it is my and her story, you know. Maybe that sounds petty somehow, but, well, I'm not a paragon of detachment and zen. Now, if you were talking about some sort of visual novel or whatever those dating sim-style books with pictures as games are called, I thought someone was already doing one sort of with this, which I'm still ambivalent about, but if they want to do it as a fan project for a small internet release, well, I'll take it in the spirit it's presumably intended and give it my conditional blessing. But if one were talking about a serious project intended for sale, particularly one that has me loving her tenderly as either a good or bad end, or beginning or middle for that matter, that'd be another story again. Basically, I guess I'm saying, if you want to write a fanfic about this and post it somewhere on the net, okay, I can handle that, so long as you're somewhat subtle in the details, but fuck, go wild if you feel like it. Just make sure you make it clear it's just that. A fanfic of this story. If you want to make it a little visual novel game out of it, hey, that's cool. I'd like to play it myself, as I've played through the ones already in beta. Spelling errors abound, guys. You should really get an editor. And some of those prose sounds weird in that format, particularly some bits that were responses to others, which were omitted, but then it is a beta. Go for it. Again, make clear it's a fanfic of this, and you can do whatever you want with it. Hell, make it XXX rated and give admirers a stroke with all that hot stumps action for all I care. But if you intend it for commercial release, either novel or game, I would not be happy about that, and do not give you permission to do so. I suppose you could ignore that and try to do so anyway, and I wouldn't have a lot of ability to stop you very easily, particularly as you'd be preying upon my intention of keeping her safe from scrutiny, and despite the beliefs of some, from ruining my best intentions of trying to take care of her, but I might try to do so. And from what you're saying here, you'd basically be stealing it. Just as unscrupulous hacks steal the tragedies of, or tear-stained triumphs of other people in real life for their hack based on a true story shit, which I've always thought was exploitative and base. So my answer would be no. Fanfic for no profit or paper short of people printing it out themselves? Okay, I can accept that. Trying to sell this for yourself, our cut aside, the feasibility of that a joke in and of itself, due to our need for privacy? No. I would not be happy, and I would not give you permission. I'm sure more knowledgeable people could go on about writing under an alias, and what that invalidates intellectual ownership, but I'm not going to do so, because I now have a raging headache. Thanks a lot. I'm done with this for now. Yeah, I appreciate that. It wouldn't really be about you and Amputee-chan as such. It would just be a novel where the main character is a male nurse, and the patient he cares for has the same story as Amputee-chan, and I'd use that plot framework to work on other themes. For example, the main character would muse on how hard it is to be a good person today. There'd be some ambiguity as to whether he really cared, and he'd question himself about it. There's all kinds of other themes I'd work into it. It'd just use the very basic aspects of the story as a basis for a plot. Obviously, if it did well, who knows, it might. You could contact me and I'd make sure you and Amputee-chan got a fair cut. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that it wouldn't just be copy-paste the Wiki-chan entries into Notepad and publish. I'd use the very basic premise of male nurse plus Amputee-chan, and really no other details would be the same, aside from maybe 1 or 2 events, such as her lashing out at the war vet. It wouldn't just be like a retelling of what you're already written, is what I mean. If you want to be inspired by it, then just leave me out of it entirely, and go ahead and Aragon my Star Wars. Make her nothing like my girl, but perhaps a basic set of symptoms. Take note of my personal acts and experiences between us. Leave out the details of her incidents and make up your own, and whatever. Part of being a writer, so I'm told, is the ability to write original content, rather than thinly veiled copies of other people's ideas. I suggest you do so. Sorry to sound harsh, but yeah, there it is.
Does she have freckles too?
And to get back to things that might actually be fun after that brief rant, which I'm sure will have no effect. No, not that I've noticed so far. But then, it is still early spring, and I've only known her since late fall and early winter, and with freckles only manifesting with exposure to sunlight, well, I don't really know. Maybe she will. She is rather fair-skinned, not creamy white or anything, but somewhere between a fair-skinned Scandinavian. Okay, I'll pin it down. Her father's family was from Norway, so Norwegian, look up pictures of them yourselves. Though they're often pretty tanned. And a fair-skinned Japanese person, so yeah, pale, but nowhere near albino, with more pink than Japanese tend to have. Actually, and here's something people interested in her might be interested in, and you genetic freaks too. Sure, that's okay. I might write it up anyway, and maybe show it to you at some point just so you can see what you think. But if you don't want it published, even though it would be so loosely based on your story that I probably could publish it, I won't do it. Like I said, if you change all the details, but male nurse plus little girl with amputations plus lost parents plus bonding, and made up the rest on your own, well, I can hardly claim rights to that, because I'm not crazy like some authors are. If you want to write about us in particular with our details, limit yourself to fanfic. That's all I'm saying. But if you do go out with a publish-bound story, don't say it's based on a true story or hint at us at all, s'il vous plaît. Yeah, that's basically what I'm talking about. Male nurse plus orphaned amputee patient is the only thing I would take from your story. I wouldn't be writing any of the events that you describe myself, because honestly, I'd never be able to respect myself if I was successful through basically paraphrasing what you've already written. I kind of feel unoriginal enough for taking the concept of male nurse plus amputee-chan anyway, which is why I wanted to deviate from your story massively. It really would be completely different. Amputee-chan would probably be moved to a different hospital and Nurse-kun would be able to see her, for example, to demonstrate the evils of bureaucracy. It's not like I'd be using the names Nurse-kun and Amputee-chan either, but thanks for taking the time to talk to me about this. Well, there you go then. As said, don't claim based on the true story or hint at it, and it'd be fine by me. You'd have my blessing that it turned out well, even. It seems she wasn't the first half-breed in her family, going way back when. Well, not way back, but a fair ways. Back to her great-grandmother on her mother's side of the family. Said great-grandmother, back in the early to mid-30s, fell in love with an American. She and her family had already been living in America for a while, so it wasn't as though she'd been picked up in a bar in Tokyo, but it was still quite unexpected for them. This blonde-haired, blue-eyed gaijin coming to ask their permission to see their daughter, which they refused apparently, but they still saw each other in secret. Pretty wild for a Japanese girl at that time and age, really. One thing led to another, as they continued seeing each other behind her parents' backs, and his too. They wouldn't be too happy about it either, and she got pregnant. With my girl's grandmother. This was in the mid-30s, back when anti-miscegenation laws were still in place, blocking blacks and whites from marrying in particular, but also just about any other sort of race mixing. It was actually illegal for them to get married in the state they lived in, and their child was actually evidence that could be used against them to bring felony charges of adultery or fornication. Or was I? Right. Now, her mother told her all of this when she'd had a bad day at school, which was rare for her, being a very happy child from all accounts pre-accident, where she got taunted by one older jerk about her parentage. She didn't attack him like she did the boy in the wheelchair, just argued back that her parents were the best in the world and etc., etc., then finally started crying when he wouldn't relent. Guess even gifted kids can be total dicks. Anyway, she got home and her mother told her the family secret, to try and help her understand that it was normal, in a way, for her to be the way she was, and that it was a good thing, that it made her special and the most beautiful girl in the world, and that it just made both herself and her father love her even more than they already did, which she then made a joke was impossible, since they already loved her 100%, and she, of course, got it and started laughing, because she knew there was nothing more than 100% of one thing, and Well, she started tearing up as she was telling it, relating many of these exact words as they were said, and how her mother laughed and hugged her tight, and when her father got home, he did the same, and added that she was his little kitten, a nickname he had for her because her eyes were green, like a Norwegian forest cat. And well, the story ends there, and I tried to comfort her again. So this explained a few things for me, like why her aunt, who happens to be her mother's identical twin sister, and the rest of her family, husband, 2 children, 1 daughter a couple of years older than she is, 1 son a few months older, haven't come to see her. After Pearl Harbor and America entered the war, Japanese civilian citizens were sent to internment camps, considered possible, well, terrorists, because them Japs were so darn inscrutable and treacherous. This included her great-grandmother, who was just a young child at that point, and grandfather, who was just a baby, having been born about 6 or 7 months before the attack. Her husband, the all-American boy, was told he wasn't required to go in as well, because his loyalty was assumed to still be where it should be, despite his exposure to her. To his credit, it seems he went in anyway, voluntarily. Brave man. They spent the remainder of the war in there. Well, most of them did anyway. A fair number of Japanese men in the camps tried to enlist in the armed forces to prove their loyalty, and her great-grandmother's husband, who I suppose would be her great-grandfather, since her grandmother had her mother, did as well, having less trouble convincing them to let him do so. He asked to be posted along with the other Japanese men from their camp that enlisted, and was, in fact, serving alongside them when they were sent to Italy, then to southern France. The rest of the unit/military group name I can't recall went on to Germany, amongst the first to liberate one of the concentration camps. But not him. He was shot and killed in France, receiving a Bronze Star posthumously, but his wife never told her children what he did to earn it. In fact, she told them very little about him at all. The only picture of him she kept was in a locket around her neck, which she was buried with. Even with the sacrifice, she and her 2 children stayed in the camp until it was shut down and the internees were released. She went home to her family, who'd been at another camp, as she and her husband had moved to another city altogether after their disapproval, and his parents as well. Luckily, her children could pass for Japanese, mostly. They had black hair and just a slightly lighter than normal skin tone for Japanese people. Their features could pass too, except for little quirks here and there, well enough that white people would rarely notice, but not enough that most Japanese people would. As a result, they were often treated poorly by the Japanese community that they lived within. They spoke perfect Japanese just as their mother did. They knew the customs, the traditions, all the things the other children knew, as their father had been quite understanding in their learning about that part of their heritage. But it was often not quite enough. Taunts came, bullying, a few beatings for her grandfather, who died when he was 10 due to accidental drowning when the ice gave out beneath him on a frozen lake during the late winter, while skating with some other boys, and the vicious sort of less physical attacks girls can level at each other for a grandmother. Her own parents, our girl's great-great-grandparents, weren't outright hostile to her children, but they weren't terribly warm and friendly either, a distinction that became very apparent when she remarried an older Japanese man, a grocer, making an offer to her parents, who accepted on her behalf. Hardly a match made in the heart, and when she had a 3rd child, another boy, the way her parents doted and spoiled him, while still behaving coldly to her other children, just solidified it all for her. And this is how her grandmother grew up. When she was 18, she left home for college, having studied long and hard enough to have earned a scholarship to go to a good school. She avoided the white student, who made up the vast majority, for the smaller Japanese population. Only a dozen or so in a school of 1,000, but none of them knew her past or her parentage, and she managed to work on her little quirks over the years to the point where she could pass with all of them. She met a young Japanese man in her 3rd year, and they began dating. She brought him home to meet her mother and stepfather formally after had graduated, and keeping her mother from seeing them together when she attended the ceremony. Her stepfather mysteriously too busy to come, where he asked for her hand in marriage, and they happily accepted. as he was an intelligent, now well-educated young man, an engineer destined for great things, no doubt, even in this land of white privilege. And he did, in fact, do quite well for himself, finding a decent position with a small but growing company and growing with it, his merit enough for his boss, who was a good man even back then apparently, finding it enough to promote him, rather than leaving him shut out of the old boys' club door. He had to work twice as hard as any of the other white engineers, of course, but he did so, despite the sacrifices that meant for their home. Even so, they had a child soon after they married, a daughter. A girl's mother's mother. Wait, I fucked this shit up. Math is hard. Okay, the woman in the camps who married the white guy was our girl's great-great-grandmother, who had her daughter, our girl's great-grandmother, who had her daughter, which I just mentioned, who was our girl's grandmother. Jeez. Sorry, all. Anyway, her half-Japanese great-grandmother maintained their home while her full Japanese great-grandfather worked, and she took care of her three-quarters Japanese daughter, who looked as Japanese as any of their friends and neighbors in the community, and was thus presented as such by her friends, the secret of her parentage kept by her mother, even her father not knowing at that point. And that's how she was brought up. She wasn't even told herself until she was in her teens, when her father learned as well after a slip of the tongue from her own grandfather. Since she knew how half-blooded children were treated, hell, she'd even made a few jokes herself, she guarded her secret zealously, and presented herself as nothing but the most traditional, absolutely Japanese woman she could. She met and married a Japanese man when she went to college as well, and they had a very Japanese life along with their American one, both of them being from multi-generation Japanese-American families. They had friends from a number of races, socialized at barbecues and neighborhood events with their neighbors, attended the company picnics, bought a cabin on a lake away from the cities for summers and holidays, the picture of the American dream, with him working hard, and her maintaining the home, while also writing books on learning Japanese for English speakers in her spare time. And they had children, a son first, then a pair of daughters, identical twins, each of them, by this point, 1/8 Caucasian, 7/8 Japanese, and they looked as Japanese as any of their Japanese friends, though they were all appealing pale, but with lighter brown hair compared to their mother, and they grew up not even knowing until they were in their teens, whereupon they learned the family secret, and how it is important to keep it that way, how it brought nothing but pain and ostracism to their grandmother, how nobody needed to know, and they were already American as anyone else, without it being built on blonde-haired blood. So life went on. The older brother went to school and became an engineer, like his father, while the older of the twins, well, by a few minutes, our girl's aunt, opted to go to school in Japan, attending a prestigious university there, all three of them very intelligent and hard workers, and thus not having many problems with admissions. Finally, our girl's mother opted for a school closer to home than Nippon, but still further away than her brother. She studied at a college here, where I'm living today, which is a fair but not great distance from home for her. And while there, about halfway through her bachelor's, she met a tall, blonde-haired, fair-skinned man with a bright smile one day in the library, apparently, and things led from one to the other, and within 6 months they were living together, and within a year, our girl had arrived in the world, 3 months after the wedding. A wedding that was unseasonably freezing, figuratively speaking, as her parents, while in attendance, didn't say a single word the entire time, or even touch her or her husband, her father walking her down the aisle, but not holding her arm, merely walking alongside her. They left the reception as soon as the vows were completed and they were pronounced husband and wife, and while her brother, who'd attended with his own wife and their infant child, stayed a bit longer, and was apologetic for their behavior, he suffered for it afterward. Her twin sister, the person she'd been closest to their entire lives, the perfect sisters, had been at least one person's nickname for them, hadn't even opened the invitation, sending it back with a return to sender on it. Our girl's mother, knowing she was curious about why the rest of the family didn't like them, and asking her if it was because of her, knew she needed to be as honest as she could be with her age notwithstanding. She was smart enough to understand most of it, and with her memory she could muse over it over time, and figure it out as she grew older. Her mother was probably hoping that they could reconcile before that happened, that they could see their brilliant, beautiful, talented granddaughter and niece for who she was, and accept her and her husband for the people they were, but, well, things happened. One big thing, anyway. And that was that. She told me all of this one night last week when I stupidly made some offhand comment about her family being jerks, just talking what I was thinking out loud, hearing about how another attempt to reach them by her social worker hadn't made much success earlier that evening via the grapevine from our resident shrinkette. I said it, and regretted it the moment I did, as she stared down at her lap. I began to apologize, and she said it was okay, and that they just don't want me. I tried to assure her nobody could not want her when they knew her, and we went back and forth for a bit before she just started talking, starting at the beginning, as if reciting verbatim something from a documentary or a story heard while sitting on someone's lap, which I guess she had. She just kept talking, with me managing to keep my mouth shut now, until she was finished, and I didn't know what to say. So I just gave her a hug as she tried to wipe her tears with the back of her hand, recounting how the accident had made reconciliation impossible, having stirred up pain within herself, and tried to help her get through the crying, while thinking they were even bigger jerks than ever, the quarter Japanese grandmother in particular. And well, there you go. I'm not a genetics expert, but I heard someone mention that blonde hair and blue or green eyes in half Japanese kids was almost impossible, so I guess this might help explain things somewhat. Not that I have anything to prove there. The gaps it fills with her family's behavior was a lot more revealing to me, and it doesn't make me like them any less. I'm not sure that'd be possible. Anyway, here are some zombie boobies. Hot pick, end of the first thread. Part 2, May 29th, 2007. Where was I? Ah, yes. Anyway, she hadn't been feeling well when I arrived, and I did my best to make her comfortable and keep her company, but that was about all I could do there. Time passed, she fell asleep, uncomfortably and uneasily. My shift ended. I made my mind up and hung around to wait for the administrator to show up, which took a while longer. Finding me asleep outside her office, she woke me up unceremoniously. The lady has got no mercy and asked me what I wanted. Doing my best to compose myself, I made a request for an excursion for the day, just a few hours away. I said that I'd call her social worker and clear it with her, so I'd just need her permission, and would let her think about it if necessary, and get back to her in said few hours. She more or less just waved me off dismissively, making it clear she wanted to pay attention to her muffin and coffee at the moment. I got in touch with her social worker on the way home, and explained my request to her voicemail. I would bring her back to my place, and take care of her while she fought off the bug, like she, or any other normal kid, would do so. In a normal home setting, resting on a couch and eating homemade soup while watching daytime television, and being mildly pampered and fretted over by an adult not dressed in scrubs and smelling of hand sanitizer. She got back to me shortly after I got home, and gave her approval. There'd already been a visit to my apartment once before for the afternoon, when it was raining and there wasn't much to do in the city, so it wasn't too unusual a request, and by now we'd built up sufficient trust, I'd like to think, that she knew my intentions were innocent, which they were, of course. Buoyed by the tides of success, I left a message with the administrator explaining the approval, and said that I'd call her back in a few hours. Then I went and crashed into bed, aiming to get those few hours of sleep that I could. I slept like a log, then was awakened and got up groggily, aiming to refresh myself sufficiently that I could perform my duties in this less formal setting to the proper level of satisfaction, which meant coffee and meth, of course. Energized, I played a bit more telephone tag, found my ducks in a row, and headed out to make a quick trip elsewhere before heading for the facility. Once I finally arrived there, I headed for her room, pausing to briefly chat with the nurse on duty and explained what I had in mind, which she seemed to be approval of. Partially, no doubt, since it would take her off her hands. As a sick patient, not some sort of special trouble, of course. So tell us, Nurse-kun, how much cleaning up did you have to do before Ampu-tan visited your house? Were you basically hiding every scrap of porn you could find? Har. It isn't as though the stuff hangs from the ceiling and overflows cupboards, you know. Yes, I tidied up a bit, of course, but it wasn't a tremendous effort. I'd already carefully organized my laptop before her last visit, after all, which was the most difficult part of it all.
Fuck you, or give a good explanation for not continuing story.
It's quite odd, isn't it? The way the thread suddenly died. I can't explain it personally, since I had nothing to do with it, and had just finished my second post when it disappeared. Seems rather odd to disappear after an hour and a half or so, considering they've lasted for 10 or more in the past. Making my way to her room and letting myself in with a light knock, I found her looking roughly as sick and miserable as she had when I last saw her awake, just sitting there, slouched a bit, not even feeling up to do anything. Reading, playing DS, folding, anything. Naturally, this just made me feel I'd made the right decision, and I'd smiled, took a seat, and told her that I had a trip planned for us. When, she asked. Why, now, I answered. She looked vaguely surprised and skeptical, but I assured her it was true, and began selecting some clothes for her to change to, and generally organizing for the trip.
Did I miss one of your posts, Nurse-kun? Last one I read was chapter 21.
I posted on a Friday night or morning or something after that, when I couldn't sleep and was sick, but it seems they never bothered to archive it. I suppose it wasn't good enough for them or something, though I did relate a story of her family's past near the end, before I passed out. She was soon enough dressed and more or less ready to go, though in her state of health she was a bit more difficult and crabby than usual, which is hardly unusual, all things considered. Still, I soldiered on, and before long I'd packed the backpack I'd brought with some essentials, and was wheeling her out of the door to my vehicle, in the generally hazy weather of the day. She wanted to know where we were going, and complained that she didn't feel like going to wherever we were going, despite not knowing where we were going yet. I, in turn, responded by telling her that it was a secret, and she'd just have to wait and see. Then gave her a lozenge to suck on. It wasn't too long before we arrived at my building, whereupon the surprise was mostly revealed, though she didn't quite grasp the meaning of it all just yet. I unloaded us, then made to wheel her into the building, and she stopped me. No, I want to walk. She frowned up at me from where she sat at, gripping the arms of the chair with both hands, flesh and mechanical alike, and after a moment's hesitation, mostly spurred on by concern for her sense of balance in her state, I nodded in return and offered her my hand. She took it, carefully with her myoelectric one, then with a combination of her left arm and body pushing to lift herself, my hand helping her steady herself on her right, and acting as a platform to pull up against with her artificial arm. She managed to stand up, slowly, arduously, helping steady her a bit more. She stepped over to lean against the vehicle's side while I folded up her chair and set it inside the trunk. Then, taking my arm again, we set off to head inside, wobbly, coughing, and damp. Once inside, we made our way past the locked doors and headed for the elevator. While I normally take the stairs, that wasn't really an option today, for obvious reasons. We passed Mrs. Palmer on the way, who slowly and stared rather blatantly, not having met her before. For her trouble, after a few seconds, she turned her head and just stared back at her, the woman having been caught at it, as she was on our girl's left and remaining in peripheral vision. At the force of that glare, the poor woman blanched, murmured an apology, and hurried on her way out of the lobby, while I tried to hide a bit of a smile of amusement. Even sick, she's nothing to mess with. The ride up was private and quiet, with her saying nothing as she clung to me, a slight shaking and sudden starts and stops of the car playing havoc with her still tenuous balance. Finally, the doors slid open, and out we went, walking down the hall at her pace until we reached my room, and slipped inside together. The moment the door closed, we were all over each other. I don't think either of us had expected it to happen. I certainly hadn't planned it, but there it was. She started working on the button and zipper of my jeans with her good hand, while I reached down to grip her diminutive chest well as much as I could. It was a little awkward kissing, with the height difference and all, but somehow we managed. All of this was before her mechanical arm, incensed by our actions, turned against us, and began acting of its own accord. It wanted us dead. Whereupon she flopped down onto the nearest chair, a bit out of breath, trembling and coughing after even the short walk, looking around bleary-eyed for this surprise.
Taking that as my cue, I knelt down and removed her shoes from her prosthetic feet, then moved to unzip her jacket as well, setting the backpack with her things, and a few other mystery contents as well, down. She looked vaguely surprised and managed to make a single word sound disappointed and unamused at the same time. Here? I couldn't help but laugh a bit at the expression on her face, bisected eyebrow raised, and simply nodded in reply as I motioned for her to move her arms so I could slide her jacket off. Yep, here. Still looking skeptical, but a bit too tired to argue, she just sighed and let me remove it, and was less surprised when I quickly followed that up by sweeping her up into my arms, then carrying her towards the couch as she grabbed my shirt out as surprise, eyes widening. At surprise at the configuration and contents of the couch and the coffee table. I'd set down Kleenex, a glass to be filled with juice, pillows, a blanket, the various entertainment remotes, and a box filled with the various comics from my collection she'd enjoyed on her previous visit. I set her down gently on the couch in the proper position, all of the above easily reachable with her good arm, and took a seat a bit further down. I told her that I knew it wasn't much fun staying at the home, and it's even worse when you aren't feeling well, as a few shifts worked while I had made clear in the past. And that I knew that when one got sick like this, one didn't want to be in a hospital or a sterile environment. One wanted to be at home, comfortable, and being taken care of. And so I wanted to provide that for her, if she'd let me. She was quiet for a moment, taking it all in, the weak rays of the sun making her hair shine like gold for a moment. Then finally just leaned forward and hugged me, stifling the cry she was fighting in my shirt, to which I responded by simply patting her back and holding her gently, letting her let it out, the memory of her complaining melancholy about being sick and being taken care of by her mom, then struggling to contain herself after relating it, one night some time back, sounding clear as day in my mind. The internet is pressing the limits on its cute intake right now. 2 or 3 kittens would put things over.
And then you showed her your penis.
No. Not yet. She recovered her composure after a few moments more, and I carefully brushed some sweat-stained hair out of her eyes as she leaned back and wiped them with the back of her good hand, smiling gently as I did so. I can't forget what she said next as she shifted to lay back against the pillow, body slightly turned to face the television and using it as a focus to avert her eyes from me. "You're always so nice to me, even though I didn't do anything to deserve it." I was surprised at this, at the expression of, even now, I'm not entirely sure, but guilt, shame on her face, and I was contemplating for a moment, then stood up, walking around her to tug the blanket, one I'd taken from home and when I left for college, and kept with me since then, up over her, and I replied, not needing to fake any emotion, but simply speaking honestly, "You don't need to do anything but be yourself, name omitted here." I hesitated, then for a moment more, before leaning down to place a kiss on the top of her head, before heading into the kitchen. Things mellowed out pleasantly after the initial spat of activity. She was still tired, so she wound up falling asleep on the couch a few minutes later, with me carefully removing her prosthetics and setting them aside as stealthily as I could. Without much to do myself, other than fill her glass with some orange juice, I wound up falling asleep as well, slumped over in the chair sharing the living room. Well, what passes for one in my place. She woke up after a couple of hours and apparently quietly began to watch TV, emphasizing quietly because she didn't wake me up in the midst of doing so. Indeed, it was another hour or so before I came to my senses again, finding her watching some History Channel special on the Manhattan Project. Looking at the clock, I realized what time it was and apologized to her for falling asleep, then asked if she was hungry, replying after a moment that she was, and thirsty as well, glass empty by then. I told her I had something special for her.
"How the fuck is your lolly not dead yet? What have I been doing wrong?"
Forgetting to check for aphids, I bet. You should buy some FF ladybugs. A few minutes of humming from the microwave later, I walked back in and set down a plate before her on the table. I adjusted things so that the bowl in the center of the set plate was within easy spooning reach, and revealed the homemade turkey soup within, the smell bringing back memories for me immediately. I'd made the detour earlier to my parents' place to pick up some of my mom's leftovers from the day before, where I'd been there to help take care of my dad, and she'd made a fresh pot of her signature dish.
The trip, I knew, would be worth it, as I couldn't think of anything better for a sick girl than delicious broth, tender meat, and fresh but softened vegetables. She added speculatively, as I explained what was in it, and assured her that it was perfect for whatever's ailing one, full not only of tastiness, but of the love of a mother and grandmother as well. I added the second title after a split second's thought of announcing the first, trying not to place too much emphasis on it, but remembering my mom's face earlier in the day, when I told her who did before, and the situation to be served in. She hadn't said anything, but the expression, well, anyway, a spoonful was carefully filled, then sampled. "It's good," came the proclamation as she swallowed it, then took another spoonful. I smiled in relief and headed back into the kitchen to make a small bowl for myself, the Tupperware holding enough for at least 4. And we simply ate in silence then, no need for extraneous conversation at the moment, watching footage of black and white houses blow over and fly into slivers. I switched on a movie for her a little while later, and popsicles to soothe a sore throat were broken out to accompany dry ice on a DeLorean's hood. All in all, it was a pleasant afternoon that soon became evening, and a second helping of soup, as well as a second installment in a trilogy, an appropriate trilogy, considering the way the time was flying. It was getting rather late as any excursion had been thus far, actually. I looked to her and found her asleep, curled up beneath the blanket. After a long moment's consideration, I finally decided to make the attempt, and called her social worker, who was already off duty by then, well, as off duty as anyone in her position could be. I explained the situation to her, and made the request that she be allowed to sleep the night, and return to the facility the next morning. Since it was my night off, there was no conflict with my schedule, and she'd be receiving care from a professional, just as she would if she were disturbed and woken up, then driven back to her bed at the facility. I chewed my lip a bit as I waited for her response after laying out my reasoning, and not unsound reasoning it was, particularly as the mentoring programs covered camping trips and overnight stays and such, odd situations or no. Still, I knew our situation was more tenuous than most. Then, almost startling to me, she said, "All right, I'll call the home. You can bring her back tomorrow." Question. Let's say she wasn't so damned cute. Would you still love her and pay the same attention to her? If, say, her whole body had been covered with burns, disfiguring her face and leaving her with no hair like the burn victims you see in the medical journals? I like to think I would. I can't really say, since she wasn't, though she is more heavily scarred than the fan art tends to accurately portray. I'm only human, and the sad fact of that state is that we tend to make emotional judgments and connections based on skim-deep views. I don't know. I never claimed to be some sort of saint here. It's other people saying things like that. Now, the first thing I did was go to my bedroom and change the sheets. I'm not a total slob, and I do so regularly, but this was a special occasion after all. I tidied up a bit more in the rest of the room as well, cleaning up some clothes tossed onto a chair in the corner. I'm tired. These clothes aren't going into the hamper right now, chair. Clearing various glasses and debris off my bedside table, etc. Once everything was good and presentable, I headed back into the living room, where she was still asleep on the couch. Shifting the coffee table aside, I moved to lift her in my arms again, resting her chin and good arm over my shoulders as I carried her into the bedroom. There, I laid her down on the bed, reaching over to dim the lamp on my desk to roughly the level of her night lamp in her room at home, and... "Hey, Nurse-kun, did you give her that copy of Oendan 2 yet?" "Copy hasn't arrived yet. Last time I buy from PlayAsia." Fake trip troll, still amusing. She went straight for my throat. She'd been thirsting for my fresh blood all week, and this was the first chance she'd had in a while. By the time I got over my shock, it was too late, and she had me in her holy vampire trance. So basically, I'd been turned into her mindless slave, willing to do her bidding, even at the cost of my own life and of those I love. I guess the really major career changes always sneak up on you. That's some good stuff. But seriously, how would that be a career change for me from my present circumstances? I tucked her into bed, then placed my cell phone with a note explaining how my pager number was set to auto-dial by pressing a certain number, which would wake me if I was asleep and she needed anything, on the table beside her. Then I stepped outside, closing the door most of the way, and went off to collapse onto the couch and fall asleep myself. Pager set to audio on the table beside me. Nurse-kun, I don't have much time before I must go to work, but I have to say I admire you and have found the whole story simply fascinating. Please keep up the good work. Although, I have to ask, are you really a dude? I could seriously see this whole thing being 10 times more believable. Not that I don't, I do, if you were a woman. But there are no women on the internet, now are there? Hey Nurse-kun, I just read a story today that may be relevant to your and Ampu-tan's interest. It was about a woman who got some kind of bad infection, it didn't say what, but I'm guessing Streptococcus pyogenes, and had both legs and one arm amputated as a child, about the same age as your lolly. She's now a medical student looking to go into pediatrics, so you can still succeed even with severe physical handicaps, if you persevere. Don't know if Ampu-tan has the intelligence of a medical school. No offense intended, not everyone does. But she can still do something with her life regardless. Neat. And well, she's smarter than I am, but hey, male nurse. We both slept pretty peacefully, save for a middle-of-the-night bathroom emergency, but even that was handled without dire results. Catching up on needed rest as we were, it was nearly 9 a.m. before either of us stirred, the either in this case being me. What there is of my pride is an adult being happy to say. After a brief checking in on her and finding her fine, and what would be a full sauna sprawl if she still had all her parts, I walked back into the kitchen to make some coffee, and began to prep breakfast as well, the scent of which apparently stirred her to wakefulness, as bacon, eggs, and hash browns, and toast sizzled away on the stove. Well, okay, not the toast, but you know what I mean. Her calling my name from the bedroom was my first clue. Walking over to peer inside and notice her sitting up and rubbing her eyes with her good hand the second. I quickly went off to fetch her prosthetics from the living room, bringing them back and settling them down for her to don them herself, as she prefers, then heading out to keep an eye on breakfast, having a feeling I waited out in the kitchen for her, whether it was another raised voice asking for help or something else entirely. As it turns out, it was the latter, as she appeared in the bedroom doorway a few minutes later, holding onto the door jamb for support with her good hand, but maintaining an admirable balance all in all, even with that nod to good sense. I met her eyes from across the room, kind of wordlessly asking if she needed help with the raised eyebrow and such, to which she responded by walking down the short hallway, hand occasionally resting on the wall for support, moving one foot at a time, well, one leg actually, since moving just that foot isn't really possible for her, and slowly, arduously, making it all the way to the kitchen table, where she practically fell into a chair. Hey Nurse-kun, I've got a rather odd question. Regarding your feelings for Ampu-tan, would you say that you're getting to the point where you love her, meant in the form of parental love, as a father or mother would for their child? Maybe not, but if adoption and all that goes through, yes, hoping for a miracle here, I think it would be a somewhat fitting summation. Well, I refuse to answer that on the ground that I'm in 4chan. Noting that she did in fact look better than she had yesterday, I asked her if she was feeling better as well, to which she answered with a nod of her head. Pleased by this, the change of health status, not the nod. I smiled and asked if she was feeling hungry, the further confirmation of which led to my placing a plate full of not entirely healthy breakfast foodstuffs before her, along with accompanying condiments. Thus, we broke our fasts, and I asked her whether she was ready to go back to the home just yet, or if she'd like to stay a bit longer. After a lack of moment's thought, she replied that she was still feeling a bit sick and should probably wait before going back, all with a straight face and a near monotone. You had to be there, but I couldn't help but laugh, and simply nodded in agreement. Finishing the meal, I cleaned up, then lent her an arm to help her walk back over to the couch, letting her lay down, though closer to sitting than the day before, and watched some television while I took care of some other arrangements. So we settled in for some of the more pleasant times in the recuperative process, and whiled the hours away doing very little save eating popsicles and watching various forms of media. Lunch consisted of Chinese delivery, and dinner consisted of leftovers from lunch. Still, I knew all good things must end, and told it that we needed to get ready not long after said dinner. Said preparations culminating in her being dressed and her things packed back into the backpack, and our walking down the hallway from my apartment to the elevator just after 8. And so the trip home was uneventful, because I'm kind of tired and running out of writing energy, and not much happened anyway. I wheeled her back inside, knowing the policies and regulations as I do, back to her room, and greeting fellow nurses on the way. Once there, I told her that I hoped I'd done an okay job of taking care of her, even though I knew I wasn't that good at it. She hesitated a moment, then leaned forward and hugged me and told me that she was happy I cared enough to try. Taking that comment in and what I hoped the spirit it was intended for, I smiled a bit and returned the hug, carefully, then stood up, patted her shoulder lightly, and told her that I'd see her soon, since I'd be back at work in roughly 3 hours or so. She almost smiled a bit at that, and we waved goodbye to each other as I stepped out of her room, and back into the fading light to go home and straighten up my apartment before going home again for another night.